Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cup of Joe. Glad you are all here with us today. 25 years ago, I started a radio show, and that's how I built my financial planning practice. I'd go on every week. I'd talk to myself for an hour because obviously on the radio, yeah, it was very difficult to have call-in shows. And my job was to teach people the difference between being a fiduciary and being a salesman. Our job is to take care of your money as if it were ours and we were in the same situation. And when I started the financial enhancement group, almost 30 years ago now, um, I recognized a challenge that very few other people saw occurring. Now, I'm only telling you this because I want you to understand where aging with clarity came from. When I got into the industry, people had started saving when they were my age. I was 21, and they had started saving for a better future. They had started saving so that they had more choices when they retired. But it became apparent to me because I dealt with people my age now and likely your age, that people had a harder time spending the money than they did saving the money. And I built a financial planning practice. We're in the top 3% of RIAs in the country as independent registered investment advisors. But I built it on the premise that people would need to know how to get the money out of their accounts and actually use it. I solved the problem way ahead of time. And I will be honest with you, it was a battle. It was a struggle telling people things that they didn't believe to be true. And yet, with aging with clarity, here I said again, trying to do the same thing all over again. In the sales world, there's an expression that people will gladly buy a cure, but they rarely invest in a prevention. And with the savings and accumulation that came from people investing their money, the message was really the same. You put it in today so that you can pull it out in the future. And younger people didn't necessarily have to believe to me that the struggle was going to be taking it out. Today, I have the challenge of building a company that we call Legacy Lock under the premise that the natural aging process leads to a risk that people have with their financial future that they don't recognize. And the problem is, from a quote unquote sales side, is it's all 100% prevention. None of this is cure. I am asking you to invest in your future, not necessarily a need that you have today. And that is very, very problematic to get across. So, Legacy Lock is really broken into three areas. Aging with clarity, the job of that is to bring you awareness. So you're used to seeing Dr. Peter Lichtenberg. Today we have Latoya joining us. By the way, she just did her verbal part, her defense, if you will, of her dissertation. And Peter told me, because she didn't, that she passed with flying colors. And that she did well, and that's you have no idea the amount of work if you've not been in the academic industry to understand how difficult that is. So we're very, very proud of her for getting that accomplished. But aging with clarity is an awareness of something that people don't want to acknowledge. And so when we look at aging with clarity, there's now 1,127 of you that are members of Aging with Clarity. And even though I talk about the subtle shift, almost 75% of the people who have joined are already having cognitive issues, either for themselves or their family, that are related to what we call impairment. So let's understand cognitive impairment again real quickly. Cognitive impairment is pathological, meaning there's a genetic break in your system somewhere. It's nothing that you did necessarily wrong. You'll have very smart people talk about things you can do from a dietary standpoint, things you can do from a mobility standpoint, things you can do from a socialization standpoint. But most of us that have been around it for a long time will tell you that nature will just take its course. It's nothing that you did. It is a genetic challenge that exists. 7 to 12% of the population get it. There are 23 diagnoses that are common. None of them that you want to have, and our prayers go out and our empathy for anybody who does, or who's taking care of a spouse or a parent or even a child that happens to have that. We have our first parent who's 80 taking care of their 60-year-old child with a diagnosis of one of those 23 diseases. It's a challenge. There are things you can do from a legal perspective if you're already there or you've been diagnosed, and you should. It's when you should go straight to legacylock.com and go to the solution part, get it taken care of. It needs to be done quickly, but there are things you can do. This group was established to support one another. Like I said, there's 1,127 of you, and some of you are doing an incredible job encouraging others, supporting others. If you had access to the map, you would know that we were as equally represented on the West Coast as we are on the Midwest. The members are everywhere, which makes the timing of Cup of Joe difficult. I remember when I left my radio show that I was actually in tears when I did it for the last time. I don't, even though I teach retirement planning, I don't understand how people actually do it. The last class I taught at Purdue was emotionally challenging for me. I did that for 7 years, 14 semesters, and it was hard. When I tuned out of my radio show for the last time, it was an emotional day. Um, Cup of Joe is not going to continue in the format that it's in. We're not going to do it at 11 o'clock on Tuesdays because that 11 o'clock on Tuesdays is different for people across the country. So Latoya and Peter and I and Toddy will try to figure out different ways to send you messages that are maybe in shorter blocks. It's not that you're losing me. It's just you're losing this dedicated time simply because it doesn't seem to work for everyone. The direct messages that we're getting are people are watching. They care about the content. And they just are not ready in large part to share the struggles and trials and challenges that they have with other people. I can't say that I understand that, but then again, I've served as a pastor. I've served as more as a preacher than a pastor, just to be clear. It's one thing to deliver a message; it's another thing to visit people in a hospital. Um, this is a tough. It's a tough subject. So let's remind ourselves what the subtle shift really is. My wife's on the screen. I'm going to pick on her and tell you about an incident from last week. Right. So the subtle shift is no different than the aging challenge that I have in my knees. Yeah, I'm 59. I walk a lot. I've hiked a lot. My knees are saying, Joe, you might have done too much, and they hurt. I hate looking in this screen and seeing gray stuff on my face. I remember the first time my barber cut my hair, and the blonde that was supposed to fall on my shirt on the black thing was clearly not blonde, though I argued against that for years. We age, we change. And the organ between my ears is no different. It changes too. And the challenge is for me, I'm very aware of it because I've done what I've done for 38 years and I've seen the changes that have taken place in people. I can see some of the telltale signs quicker than other people can, and some of them are just humorous. Barb and I went to the Colts games for 13 years. We had season tickets. Our kids were raised watching Peyton Manning and Dwight Freeney and doing all of the fun stuff that you do at a football game. And we were at the high school football game this last weekend, and Barb's mind just didn't remember what the play clock was, right? And she goes, well, they just added this clock. Well, no, they didn't just add this clock, honey. And everybody kind of giggled at her, except me. I didn't giggle because I understand that is one of the challenges that we have as we age. Now, before you freak out, if that's happened to you, understand I remember in seventh grade the embarrassment at McKinley Middle School when I could not in my head figure out what the word ski meant. I don't come from a skiing community. There was just a brain block of this three-letter word, and I couldn't pronounce it. I couldn't get it out, and it took about 10 minutes. This is not a sign of cognitive impairment or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or any of that other stuff. It's just one of those little glimpses into um, a mental block that we have sometimes. And one of the biggest challenges with aging with clarity is understanding that you are going to have normal, great moments. Everything is going to be fine. You're going to have perfectly clear decisions. The challenge is when you have that momentary miss, it's not funny. And many times it can be irreversible. So when I talk to my second in command, who I did last night, Toddy will tell you I was having a tough day yesterday. So I texted both of my second in commands. I have two because I have different types of assets where it takes two different types of people to help make the decisions because of overlap of ownership. And I kind of shared with them what was going on inside of the day to make sure that I was thinking in my typical coherent pattern. And that's part of the challenge. You have to be able to have somebody to check in with that will be honest, brutally honest sometimes, and say, here's what's going on. So, what I want to talk about today, and then we've got 5 questions that came from the community, and I'm going to let Latoya say a few things after I go through this first part. Um, Somebody used phraseology that really disturbed me, and they called themselves an orphaned elder. And I don't know why that cut to the core, but it cut to the core. And I tried to write about it 3 times. I tried to think about what to say about it. In this case, they had no kids. Their siblings were dead. Their parents were dead. They felt orphaned. And they said, Joe, I've looked at your stuff on Legacy Lock, and I'm in the Aging with Clarity community, but I don't know what to do about the second in command part. Now, I have solutions for that. It's just they're not as perfect solutions as if you had somebody in your life that you talked to all of the time that knew all of your intentions. Please remember that when I talk about second in command, you don't need a financial genius. You need somebody who understands what you would have done if you were in that situation and were able to make the decision entirely on your own, because that's where the second in command really kicks in. When I start making decisions, if I would have said something last night and my brother or one of my partners, Adams, my two trust protectors, would have said, Joe, you're not thinking like you, then they have a job to do. But the only way they can do that job is if they know how I would have thought. This is a very difficult task to outsource to a CPA or an attorney or somebody who really doesn't know your intentions and just serves at it from a legal side. But remember the rule on second command. It should never be a beneficiary, and it should never be somebody who can be bullied by the beneficiaries or their spouses. Those are two very, very, very important rules. If you've got somebody who is going to be influenced or impacted by the things that you're leaving behind, they should not be in this role. If they can be bullied by somebody who is receiving that money, they should not be in that role. You don't want to put them there, and you don't want your future there. Those are the two rules. So let's get to the lesson for this week, and then I'll answer the questions that Toddy dragged out that were the most important to the group. I wrote about it this morning. You may have seen the post already. Um, it's the blame game. So you probably know that Toddy, I talked about it last week, lived through a 7.4 magnitude earthquake in Colombia. You know that the National Weather Channel was in Anderson, Indiana, because we had historic rains not seen in 1,000 years, like any of those people were ever alive. And they talk about these numbers and they talk about it. Well, you can only imagine the blame comes out now. How could you not see this coming? Right? How could you possibly do this? And, in my life, similar to a lot of yours, you go to those big, you know, nobody saw this coming kind of things. And I always contrast Katrina, which was obviously very, very devastating, and 9/11. I look at what happened up to, and I looked at the response, and I looked at the reaction. Remember when you're managing money or really managing any future problem, many things can happen that don't. Let me say that again. When you're looking at problems, many things can happen that don't. Most people do not ask what worked in Indianapolis that didn't get the rainfall. But everybody's challenging what the administration did in Anderson, where we did get the rainfall, right? I think there are always lessons to be learned in any crisis, but our job is to make sure as individuals, as adults, that we protect ourselves from things that are the most probable outcomes that have the largest amount of impact. So the example that I gave when I taught at Purdue, and I've talked about this a little bit before, there's four things you can do with risk. You can avoid it, you can transfer it, you can retain it, or you can insure it. I do not walk around and pick up toys that Willow, my granddaughter, leaves laying around because I might stub a toe. It's very, very probable that that will occur, but the impact of a stubbed toe is not going to change my life, nor yours. Um, I do make sure that um, cars are locked or in garages when I go to places where cars are often liberated by other people, right? You want to get rid of the risks that you can, even though there's many things that could have occurred that really, really didn't. So I wrote down a few things just for you to kind of take away with that, just to think. And now I got to put my specs on, proving my age yet once again. Remember, when something goes wrong in your family, that the human mind, and it's just how we're wired. This is not a break. It's not anything in you. You're not a bad person if you do it. I do it. It's just a natural consequence, I think, of being human. We always look for, from a confidence standpoint, because our heads function better when we're confident. We always try to say, this happened because. Barb's riding with Kendra this morning, and she did it on the way here. We have mosquitoes in fashion that I've never seen before. And she said, well, that's because of the standing water. It's likely true, right? All I know for sure is that were 100 mosquitoes on my dog and I didn't like it, right? We search to say this is why every time we can. It's a confidence builder, and our minds feel better when we're confident. We don't deal well when we're unsure. So sometimes we say this happened. We give things what we would call causation instead of just correlation. We do that because it makes us feel better, makes us feel more confident. The same is true with blame. When something bad goes wrong and happens, we tend to try to find an individual to say they should have done better, they should have seen it coming, this should have been more prepared for. And the failure in that is the failure to recognize that many things could happen that didn't. I will always argue that Katrina, um, things should have happened differently down there. I think things probably should have happened differently with 9/11. But the responses in those two places, the lessons that were learned were dramatically different. We have to learn from the mistakes. And part of this community, part of this sharing is saying, hey, this is what I saw happen. And by the way, I've seen 71 things that I have earmarked that have happened to beneficiaries that people didn't see coming. I didn't see coming. I didn't expect to see a valedictorian go to prison for 7 years, right? For falling asleep in a car on a spring break trip. Didn't expect it, right? I didn't expect for kids to die before parents. I didn't expect divorces after 25 and 30 years of marriage. There's a lot of things I just didn't expect that I've witnessed over 38 years. You can prepare for any of those individually, or you can prepare for something that happens and make sure you've got a plan in place. And aging with clarity is the awareness that as we have this subtle shift, as we age, as our ability to take in complex data begins to change, that we have a process in place that retained our thinking and a second in command just to be able to bounce stuff off of. That's what aging with clarity is built for. That's what it's around. It's for you guys to support each other, to understand that process, solutions that you may have found if you happen to be, I hate the word orphaned elder. The groups that are out there, they're in different communities, they're in different places. I took all the strategies that I created and I put them in a toolkit. You can find that at legacylock.com. Those are the strategies. You can take those strategies and hopefully use them. I've made them financially accessible to almost anybody. But they're everything that I've learned over 38 years. There's stuff in there from Latoya, there's stuff in there from Doc, and stuff that, frankly, I've just seen go wrong that could be fixed. And for those of you that need a solution, the solution is also there on legacylock.com. I've got a legal team that can help you fix this right away. So in this blame game, think about the mind reaches for a person, not a cause. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a normally wired human. It doesn't mean we have to be that way. Stop, pause, something bad happened, quit looking for blame, and look for what the cause was and make sure that we plug the hole if we can. Learn from lessons. I don't know if it was Confucius or who, but somebody said, always learn from your mistakes. Better yet, learn from somebody else's, right? I want to learn from the mistakes that I have seen. I don't need to repeat them just to prove that I'm strong. More things can happen than actually will. It's not who failed. Here's the question for you. It's not who failed, it's what wasn't in place. Before the person stole the money by calling, the scammer called and got you to send money to somebody, what wasn't in place that allowed that to occur? And what can we change for next time so that it doesn't happen again? There's some mistakes that are made that we can't go back and fix, but we can always do things ahead of time. This was one of the first things we identified. Latoya is in charge of Save Your Bacon. You've got her number, right? Somebody's trying to get you to give them money. You don't have to call me. You don't have to call your sons or your sister and confess to a little bit of I just want to be safe. I want to be sure. You've got an anonymous person in Wayne State University, and Latoya's happy to take the call and go, no, here's what's happening, or yeah, this is legit. I mean, she's got the capacity to do that, and certainly has not reached our level of seniority, as I would like to say. Remember that when you put blame, um, you create shame, right? One divides, the other's repairs. When I talk to somebody about, okay, this happened, how do we prevent it from happening again? Or this happened to your best friend, or this happened to your neighbor, how do we prevent it from happening again? Um, that builds relationships, it doesn't destroy them. Forgiveness and preparation are cousins. I always try to remind that it's hard for people when something goes wrong and there's really tragedy. It is easier for people apparently in the grieving process that I don't necessarily understand to have somebody to blame it on. than it is to just say something bad happened. Um, Something bad happened in Columbia. Something bad happened in Anderson, Indiana. Something still bad happening in Gary, Indiana. I told Toddy last night the poor people there haven't had power for 12 days. In an impoverished part of Indiana. You may have seen Gary in the news. That's where the Bears are thinking about going, somewhere near that area. Sorry, Latoya, we're going to move the Bears to Indiana, and then Detroit really has no chance, right? Because you'll have that superpower from Indiana, and we'll be ready to go.
Don't think about it, Joe. It's gonna be okay.
Uh, All right, Latoya. So what would you like to add to this, and then we'll go to the next part. And again, congratulations. We're very proud of you.
Thank you. I just would like to add, everything you're talking about is spot on. All things that we've been doing for a number of years. Especially as the second in command. Sometimes we refer to it as a financial advocate or a very, informal system, but someone that you can bounce ideas off of and go to with if you're suspicious about something or if you're feeling unconfident about a decision that you're making, having that trusted person, someone that you know who knows you, that you can trust, so to speak, and who knows kind of like how you think and what you would want and how you make decisions. I think that's so important to have. And it's great that Legacy Lock is helping people to understand the importance of that and providing that through the platform. Also, the orphan elders. I've never thought about that to use that term, but we see them a lot. I have a lot of people who will say, I don't have anyone to do that for me. Even with just personally, my great grandmother, even though she had lots of grandchildren and great grandchildren, she lost three of her four children, all of her siblings, her mom, dad, both of her husbands, like almost everyone that she had known in that role were gone. And I frequently remember her, saying, not using the term orphan elder, but kind of like saying that all the people who would take care of her weren't around because the younger people were so busy. That is an interesting term, and I just want to say thank you for it. But we do see it a lot, especially with people living well into the ninth and 10th decade of their lives sometimes. We do see where, everyone, even if they did have children, sometimes even their children go before them and they just don't have people around to serve in this role for them of a advocate or second in command, trusted other, or however you would phrase it. So that I can see that being a huge issue. I know there are some solutions, but like you said, you want it to be someone that you know, that understands you, that kind of like knows how you think about financial matters and what decisions that you would make. And I think that's one of the most important things of this advocate or second in command. I always tell people like one of the most important things is someone who's going to respect the way that you make decisions and respect, the way that you think about your money. You want to make sure it's someone who has those attributes. So that's, I mean, all I would add, but I think you make great points about that.
Thank you. I'm sorry the term resonated because it hits both of us. I have at least 25 widows that I take care of that are and I've never used the term orphaned elder in my life. That was somebody that joined this community and it just kind of cut, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really, really cut. Let's talk about second in command real quickly because you really have two of them, in my opinion. In my trust, I have two second in commands. They serve different roles and responsibilities. So you need to have a second command that is with it financially, all right, that does have to act as a fiduciary, can be challenged in court if they don't do that, if they don't appropriate. So I built one of those trust companies. We use our RIA for that. They are on the hook legally to manage people's money, to take care of the taxes if it's in a trust, to do all of the administration stuff that's required, and that person does need to be financially aware and financially, in my opinion, liable for making bad decisions if they would happen to do that. So, the financial enhancement group in my case is my second in command from the legal administration. The other second in command, remember the two rules. They can't be beneficiaries and they can't be bullied by the beneficiaries or their spouses, right? Those are the other two things that you always need to make sure of. And so people will say, "Well, I'm going to make it one of my kids because I trust my kids." In this case, the value that you get from a known trust is diminished by the guaranteed amount of family conflict, distress, and duress that will be added to their lives later on. I assure you, after doing this with more than 2,500 families, the risk is not worth the return. I don't care who they are. You do not want to argue, have siblings arguing over distributions. You should never have an even number that winds up in court. I've got two daughters. There is no way in the world that I would name the two of them where they would be in conflict with one another. Because you may think in your mind that, well, that wouldn't happen with my kids, and I can tell you that it almost always happens with those kids. I don't care when you have identical twins with the same job living in the same community. They have different opinions. I don't know how. God made us that way. In this case, somebody has to be in charge. It should be somebody who doesn't necessarily need to be a financial genius. That's why you have that trustee. That's the one of the people that's your second in command, the successor trustee that you've named. And then your trust protector doesn't need to have any financial prowess, any capability in that area. They just have to have the capacity to be able to serve your interest and help the trustee make decisions if you're unable to make them for yourself. In my case, I can clearly make my own decisions. I don't think any of you would argue with my level of competency. And yet, last night, I texted both of my, because I have two trusts, because I have different assets. I texted both of them to make sure that I had not gone astray momentarily. The between the orphaned elder, between the rain, between the Toddy getting her stuff wiped out, between worrying about the people in Colombia and being responsible for $1 billion of other people's money, stress can sometimes get a little bit higher than it ought to. And so I have those sounding boards that can go, no, you're thinking about this like you normally would. Doesn't take the pain away. Just make sure that I'm not overreacting to the decisions that I'm making. So you really need to have that in your planning. So again, the things to take away from this first part, one, the cup of Joe is not going away. It's just not going to be at 11 o'clock. It's not going to be in this structure. We'll send out videos over the course of the week that are shorter, so that you have them kind of like the classroom material, but so that you can watch them like most people are at their own period of time. Secondly, aging with clarity. This community, 1,127 of you, is designed for engagement. Please continue to it. Vicki, you're doing a great job in doing that, encouraging people. Keep communicating, keep asking questions, keep putting stuff out there. We'll continue to build and nurture the community the best that we possibly can. But it's about awareness of a problem that as we age, our cognitive capacity changes. It, I refuse to use the word deteriorates. It just changes. That's the quote unquote subtle shift that I talk about. The second part of this then is legacy lock. If you want to go there, it's got all of the strategies that we talk about. How to appoint your second in command, their roles and responsibilities, so that you can give people kind of a track to run on. Those are the strategies, and it's affordable, it's easy, sent right to your mailbox, and you can have it. And it is the prevention; it's not the cure, right? It is a prevention, and it's a prevention that you need to put in place because once you need a cure, a lot of this truly becomes too late. Bad things can already happen, and we don't want bad things to happen if we can possibly avoid them. For those of you that are in crisis now, that are having truly cognitive impairment, it's most of the time not too late. You can go straight to Legacy Lock, say, I want the solution, and the legal team goes straight to work, and inside of 10 days, you've got everything you need to be able to battle an unknown future ahead. It's not going to take away the pain, but it will take away some of the financial challenges that are there, and you know who it is you're dealing with. All right. So Toddy came up with, I think, I don't know, five questions she wanted me to answer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we will go from there. Age-related changes: when a small change is simply part of aging, and when is it a pattern worth noticing? Um, I think the example I gave was Barb and at the football game. I don't laugh at stuff like that. Um, I understand why it was humorous. I understand why other people thought it was humorous. I think one mistake is we laugh things off too quickly. Laugh is kind of a psychological defense. They taught people in sales a long time ago. You can say almost anything you want if you smile when you do it, and you don't have to worry about the consequence. People take in body language, they take in facial expressions, posture, much more than they do words. And um, so that part concerns me. So the what I did for me in this is I document how I make decisions. And I go back and I reference them all of the time. And those are the patterns that I want to see changed. If and I think I wrote about this in several of the posts on Aging with Clarity. Um, when I buy assets to use them, not to think that they're going to appreciate in value and try to sell them later. I won't argue about which is right, which is wrong. I will just tell you if suddenly I started buying assets to leave around because I thought they were going to be worth more in the future, other than investments in my retirement accounts, I that would be a change, and it should something that my trust protector should notice. If I stop golfing or stop socializing, where I used to do it a lot, there are questions that should be asked. That's not necessarily a change of a pattern as much, but there's questions that should be asked because when people start to have um, issues that they don't want to address with other people, one of the things that we do tend to do is to move toward isolatory behaviors. We go away from other people. So you want to pay attention if you're a churchgoer to people who went to church, and suddenly stop attending. Um, there, there's reasons why that kind of stuff happens. So the pattern that I would tell you to pay attention to in age-related changes is behavior changes and decision-making changes. I think the easiest one for us to watch is the decision-making one. And again, you can read a lot of the posts that I've written about this because I'm one of those weirdos that thinks about my thinking. I record how I made decisions. I don't expect the rest of the world to do that. I'm not telling you you have to do that. But if you made a decision in the past to or present to buy a house, buy a car, do something like that, the best time to document it would have been yesterday, but the next best time is today. You write it down and say, these are the things that I thought about. And so that when you have to make a decision 3, 5, 10 years down the road, and somebody says, "Well, mom, you're not thinking clearly," you can say, "Well, here's how I thought about it last time. Here's my format. Oh, you're right. I missed this thing that mattered last time." All right. That's so you can kind of use yourself as a sounding board. I will tell you, I believe in 5 to 10 years, AI knowing how our decision-making process works may help us with this, but that's more than some of you want to deal with. All right, what's next, Hattie? Recently retired. Retirement may close one chapter, but how do you safeguard everything you spent decades building? This is a challenge. It's even a challenge inside of Legacy Lock. You have two types of assets. You have tax deferred assets that are in 401ks, 403bs, 457s. Those are all government controlled Department of Labor and retirement accounts that name a beneficiary. You also have IRAs, which, as John would tell you, are individual retirement arrangements. People believe they're accounts. The critical part to understand that is IRAs. You can have many more than one, and many people do, which can create some confusion if you're trying to help somebody clean up a mess. But an IRA has a beneficiary designation, and it has to be owned by the owner. Same is true of a retirement account that's done by the Department of Labor, a 401k, 403b, 457. So people will put things in their wills. Like, Latoya may have a will that says if something happened to me, I want this to go to my child. Right. Well, that's all great, except it has nothing to do with her 403b she has at Wayne State. The 403b passes only through the beneficiary designation. It doesn't matter what's in the will. Remember, it doesn't matter what your will says if the asset never got there. It doesn't matter what your trust says if the asset never got there. So, because IRAs and 401ks um, have to be owned individually unless a court has ordered a guardianship. So far, that's the only solution the IRS has provided for us. Unless somebody has guardianship that has to be granted by a court, you can't even hand it off without the court saying yes. The IRA money is essentially unprotected by your successor trustee, by your second in command, which again is why you don't just need to have a second in command. You need to have a process for decision making that the second in command can try to hold you accountable to. It's not a perfect solution, but it is the only solution that we have right now. So, two things to take away from that. One, remember, if it's not in the trust, it doesn't matter what the trust says. So if something has a beneficiary designation and the beneficiary is a human, not a trust, it doesn't matter what the trust said, the beneficiary provision prevails. That's one. The second thing is make sure that your trust protector, your second in command, understands the assets that you have and the conversations that are lurking, if you will, that'll have to be made at some point in time, whether it's required minimum distributions or QCDs if you're a charitable giver, those kind of things. Those are part of the things that I do in some of the training. Some of those conversations you'll find inside of the toolkit in terms of strategies as well. What's next, Taddy? What should advisors understand? We have a lot of people in this community. John's one of them as a financial advisor. We have a lot of people that are in this group that already serve seniors one way or the other, that are trying to learn. And somebody said, Joe, do you really want them in the group? And the answer is, heck yes, I want them in the group. I invited some of them. I can't do this alone. This is not, I build a company. I'm proud of the company I have. I've been very, very, very blessed. I'm doing this because I see the problem and nobody else wants to handle it. It's the same problem I saw 30 years ago when I started the investment firm. People thought the whole thing was about saving, not understanding it was about spending. Today, I'm telling you this that a legacy planning is not about what happens when you're dead. It happens while you're still here. What about you? And that's what I'm taking care of. So, what should advisors understand about aging, judgment, and family dynamics that the traditional financial education may not teach? Is that pattern that you guys need to watch is when people begin to make investment decisions differently than they did in the past. When somebody and remember, when I talk about financial, there's three primary areas you can break it down to. It's spending, investing, and giving. And so when I watch people begin to give who've never gave before, and I don't care if that's to family or to churches or charities. And I break charities down, by the way, to civic organizations, the orchestra, the university, and charitable. Those are the pastors, places of that nature. Um, I try to watch those patterns. If somebody has never given before, especially civically, and they start to, there's questions I begin to ask. I don't stop them, but there's questions I begin to ask and try to contain the direction that they're going. There are people who will give money to brand new charities that sound like a great cause with no no ability at all to solve what they say they're solving. They're just collecting money for other people. And we have to be aware there's not necessarily more bad people today than there were yesterday. It's just the digital media lets you find them quicker, talks about the problems quicker, and gives them another platform to be able to liberate you from your money if you're not careful. So having people like Latoya and Save Your Bacon are very, very helpful in that regard. But it's giving, saving, and giving. It's spending, investing, and giving are the three areas that I watch. I think John said something probably about verbal patterns, which is very true. People change the way they structure questions, the way they structure comments. Those are things that you need to watch and be aware of. John, you want to add anything there? I don't know if you're searching for mute or not.
No,
All right, go
I
ahead.
had a Bob
Oh,
was at a Bible class this morning, and one of the things, and then a bunch of old guys is called Romeo's retired old men eating out as a Chick-fil-A. The overview is, and in my case, I like to walk around my neighborhood not for exercise, but to see how my neighbors are doing. I'll translate that into much more understandable pattern. When a lawn goes to hell in a handbasket, usually the person who lives there either is sick or broke or something along those lines. You have to keep track of that for your neighbor, not just for the property values, but to be part of a good stewardship. So listening to people closely and documenting it, no kidding. Because if you've done any legal work, and God knows we have done that as a CPA, that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. If it's not recorded, it didn't happen. So document things. The second in command idea is a swell idea, and I think I'm going to invest in your, I'm going to call it your lockbox in terms of that. Because the one thing you learn at even 78 and a half is you should always be curious and always be learning. No matter how much you know, there's always something else to learn. So be curious. And for years, we've had what we call family meetings. And I always ask my clients to give their kids permission to call me if dad or mom loses it on the curve. And I also give my clients and my son who works with me and my darling wife saying, gee Willikers, unless I have the flu, if I start acting stupid, would you go ahead and call me on that? So being held accountable is absolutely essential. And yes, if you have a smile on your face, you can be telling somebody to go to hell and not even in Italian and get away with it.
beautiful thing. Thanks, John. Very good. Um, Next one, Toddy. How can adult children begin the conversation about the future without making their parents feel they're trying to take over? This is a private group, but it's and some people would say that I'm too transparent. Somebody's going to give me grief for talking about Barb at a football game. Maybe Barb, who knows? Um, I think if I don't tell you what's going on in my life, it's really hard for me to expect you to tell me what's going on in yours. So I have 86-year-old in-laws that I love dearly. I've been married for 38 years. Um, I have we have two grandchildren that their grandparents adore them. I'm not sure my in-laws have ever missed a sporting event, music event, school play, or anything else. They've just been phenomenal, and they love their granddaughters. And Barb has a brother, and finally at 86, and these people are still sharp. They are more actively involved in church and everything else than you can possibly imagine. But the health is starting to deteriorate. The ability to do things is starting to deteriorate, and the confusion is starting to become more and more apparent. And so they finally reached out and said, "Hey, it's time to get this put together." And I said, "Amen," in the background, right? So we're sitting down and we're having this conversation. And I will just tell you this: when it comes to second in command, remember the rules, right? It should never be a beneficiary, and it should never be somebody who can be bullied by the beneficiary. And I make those rules real clear. I will tell you. So a lot of people will name John. I've been named a lot. I'm the trust protector. We're the trustees of over 150 trusts. I'm the trust protector personally for more than 30. It is a heavy weight. John's 78 still going. Most CPAs aren't. And one of the firms that I worked at, that the first thing that they did when they retired was sent resignation letters for where they had been named trustee, not trust protector, but they made sure that people knew that they were resigning from the role of being trustee. And suddenly, these people that were in their 80s that thought they had somebody to rely on no longer had somebody to rely on, which I think is one of those defaults where people go back to saying, well, I'm going to name my kids. They're always going to be there. Well, the risk is not worth the reward, my friends. The problems are just too strong and not worth it. Um, so you've really got to know who that trust protector is going to be, and you've got to understand the burden that you are handing them. And when you're dealing with parents that you love, a brother-in-law who you don't see a lot, and resources that are reasonable, especially for central Indiana, the pressure of taking that role as trust protector was a little more overwhelming than I expected. The other 32 that I have, where I'm the trust protector in those families, I know clear cut the decisions that have to be made because of the way the letters have been written. I help people with letters of intention. I would always encourage you to do that, write out as often as you can, not legally, but as kind of a direction, if you will, for the second in command. Um, they're clear cut because I ask very pointed questions. What would you do in this instance? How do you feel about this? What would you want me to do in this case? I'm able to take what I've learned from all of the families and apply it to an individual family. Again, part of what's in the toolkit and the strategies part. It's tough. Just understand what you're asking somebody to do, and please, please, never do it to your kids. They won't know how to say no, but they have no idea what they're saying yes to. It's kind of, everybody wants the title and nobody wants the responsibility. Just trust me on this. Attorneys will tell you it's fine to name your kids. They may have even named their kids, and I swear it's because they don't deal with dead people. They do not see the messes that John and I get to see when people come in after somebody is gone, and try to help somebody walk through probate, which attorneys do not consider a bad word. And I would just roll over in multiple graves if I put my family through probate because I didn't do something correctly. Um, Anyhow, I don't know how to make that any more pointed, but how do you begin that conversation? Um, you start with the one that's easy, the one that people don't want to acknowledge but are willing to, and that's health. And you start there. If something were to happen to Barb, who do you want to make the medical decision to operate or do anything else? In most states, some of those choices you can make on your own, but somebody has to deal with the doctor or somebody has to deal with the nursing staff. So you start with that conversation because everybody kind of expects it, right? So Kendra is my healthcare director. She's the least emotional and she's the RN, right? Kaylee will keep me alive forever. Kendra will keep me alive for a week or two. And then, just kidding, honey. I know she can hear this because she's with Barb. Um, but you've got to be careful with who that person really, really is. But it's a conversation you can have because everybody kind of expects it. And then the next question that you can kind of go into is, all right, so if you had a financial question, Dad, um, who would you want to help you with that? Right. And that's where there's going to be a little bit of resistance. These are rarely one-time meetings, just so you know. And giving examples of other people are often helpful. But those conversation starters are, I mean, To a large degree, this is like therapy. Um, you've got to get people to where they need to be, not where you want them to go. And I think understand that as a mission. Most people, when they start conversations, have a desired outcome. And in this case, your desired outcome needs to be that they are taken care of the way they want to be taken care of, not the way that you think they should be taken care of. I've watched kids try to take over to convince parents they shouldn't give money to church. That's not going to go real well if the parent is always given money. Um, yeah, and Latoya is saying something. I don't have my glasses on, Latoya, so I can't read it, but I pipe up if you want to say something.
I'm sorry. No, I was
No,
putting in that we talk about this as a difficult conversations model, but it kind of like mimics motivational interviewing, where you go into someone and you're talking, and like you said, you don't try to push your desired outcome on them. You go in and kind of like gauge where they are, what they're thinking, confirm kind of like what they think they want to do. So we really talk about that, not going in, not being upset if the person they say that they want to help them isn't you. Understanding that you're going into this to help them make decisions that is going to make them more protected, and letting them kind of like guide that conversation and guide you to getting to those decisions, and kind of like you're really looking at how you can help them to implement these things other than getting them to just do what you want them to do. So we do talk a lot about that difficult conversations model and how you approach mom and dad. And I think it maybe even go with your first point about the blame game. If you're approaching the conversation because something has happened, if you go in blaming them, what did you do? How did you manage to let this happen? They're going to shut down, right?
absolutely.
But if you go in, quite a bit softer and saying something like, um, I noticed some things have been going on with you. How are you feeling about this happening? What's going on? Like, so what do you think, maybe facilitated that, and letting them kind of like come to these conclusions, and they're not feeling like you're pushing them or blaming them, or trying to make decisions for them. Because one thing that we all know, especially if you're dealing with your parents, like your parents are always going to be your parents. So in their mind, you cannot tell them what to do, right? So you have to figure out how to get in there and have this conversation, while reassuring and confirming what they're feeling and what they're thinking.
Very good, dear. Thank you. I I try to tell people when you have a conversation that are tough, always know what you're going to ask, but don't try to control the outcome. Um, people will not behave the way that you want them to, but you can at least know you can at least kind of practice the conversation. These are the questions I'm going to ask. And the remember the more you can take a conversation into something that feels less threatening, and the easier it is to get somebody to open up their doors. I do tend to try to go to past experiences that I know to be true. Um, Mom's on here, so I'll give away one of my secrets. I have taken mom back to camping at Monticello, Indiana, at Indiana Beach on more than one occasion to get her to remember my cousins that are now deceased that were more like her brother and sister, because that opens up a different part of the mind for thinking and being open to a conversation that she might not have otherwise been open for. And I assure you, she has no idea what I just said. But it's I try to get people in a comfortable position to be able to make difficult questions or answer difficult questions. And some of these conversations are not the easiest. Nobody wants to talk about them. I get. I just am not willing to deal with the results of not having the conversation, because those are devastating. They're irreversible, and just unfathomable. But they happen. Thanks, Latoya. Much appreciated. I'm glad you're here again. Congratulations, honey. Next question, Toddy. Which details are most often looked? I'm going to hit this one real quick. It's when you put something in a will or you put something in a trust and the asset never got there. It's real simple. Those are the biggest ones. I've seen trusts that aren't signed. That's sad. I've seen documents that are missing, but a lot of the legal world can be confusing. But the biggest one by far that is overlooked is somebody creates a trust and says, this is where I want it to go, but the asset never gets there, right? The trust is a conduit for your wishes, wills, hopes, and desires. If the asset doesn't get to the trust, it doesn't go to where you told it to go, right? And they almost all pass via beneficiary or what's technically called operation of law. Those are the biggest ones. We can do a whole nother segment on that. It's noon. We've all got commitments. I certainly appreciate you all being here. And please keep the questions coming. Remember, this is the last one at 11 o'clock on Tuesday. We will make this open for people in another way, in a better way. But I appreciate you all being here. Please continue to stay engaged with the community. What we're doing matters. There's just no doubt about the importance. It's just a matter of getting the message out. Have a great day, my friends. Thank you all very much. Thanks, John.